Have you ever wanted to bring your photos to life? In this video, I'm going to show you how to animate your photos in Photoshop. Hi, welcome back to the Photoshop training channel. I'm Jesus Ramirez. In this Photoshop tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use Photoshop's 3D and animation features to create a 2D parallax effect. I'll be working in the latest version of Photoshop. If you're in an older version, you can still follow along, but there'll be slight differences. I'll try to mention it in the video. However, I do have a tutorial that is about 7 years old where I create a similar effect in Photoshop CS6, so you can follow that tutorial instead if you like. I'll place the link down below in the description. Okay, let's get started. This is the photo that we're going to work with. I have a link down below in the description where you can download this file if you want to follow along with me. So, the first step is to separate the foreground from the background. So we need two layers, a background without the jumpers and a foreground with just the jumpers. To do so, go into Select, Subject. In Photoshop, we'll use Adobe Sensei, which is Adobe's artificial intelligence, to select the main subject of the photo. If you're in an older version, then you will have to use the Quick Selection tool or other selection tools. Then what you need to do is make sure that you have a selection that is pretty good, that is matching the edges of the subject. This selection is not perfect, but it got us started. You can then press the Q key on the keyboard to enter the quick mask mode. This will place a red overlay over the selected areas. What you can do now is select the brush tool and paint with either black or white. You can paint with white to reveal areas that should be revealed. So for example, here, I need to make sure that these areas are revealed. For some reason, the artificial intelligence didn't select these areas, but I can just paint on them to select them. Then I can paint away this background area here. I can click on this arrow to swap my foreground and background color. Now my foreground is black, and I can paint to hide pixels, so anything in red will not be visible. Instead of clicking on the arrow, you could also press the X key on the keyboard to swap the foreground and background color. So now I can paint with white in these areas here to reveal those pixels. I'm not going to spend too much time on making sure that I have a perfect selection because that is too time consuming. But in your own projects, make sure that you do spend the time making a pretty good selection. Here, I'm just trying to make it good enough for the tutorial, but that's okay because you'll still be able to see the effect that we're going for. And just hold the spacebar and pan throughout the entire image and make sure that you select the pixels accordingly. Let me just keep making these adjustments. It looks like for the most part, everything was selected accordingly. I'm just going to paint with white here to bring these pixels back. And the shoes need to be visible as well. And like I said, I'm being very loose in this selection. And actually, this is a non-destructive technique, so you might want to do a rough selection first, and then when you're done with the animation, you can continue fine-tuning the mask, because maybe you'll find that the image that you're using doesn't work. You don't want to waste time masking something that you're not going to end up using anyway, or maybe you find out that with a loose selection, the animation still looks good, so you don't need to spend the time fine-tuning. So obviously, it all depends on the image that you're working with. What I'm going to do now is just make sure I have this shoelace selected, and that will be the last thing that I'm really going to focus on, and we can move on into the actual animation. So I'll double click on the hand tool. There's one thing I missed that I really wanted to include, which was this tube here. So let me select it, and then I will bring back the selection. So there you go. You'll notice that there's a lot of little pieces that I am not selecting or selecting by accident. That's okay. We can change that later. But anyway, I'm going to double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen, and then I'll press the Q key on the keyboard, and that is our selection. Next, I'm going to duplicate the foreground layer by clicking and dragging it into the new layer icon. And then I'm going to click on the Add Layer Mask icon to create a layer mask that only has these guys jumping. Next, I need to focus on the background image, and I need to remove them from the background. To do so, I'm going to hold Control on Windows, Command on the Mac, and click on the Layer Mask thumbnail to load that mask as a selection. Next, I'm going to go into Select, Modify, and Expand. I want to make this selection larger, and we'll do 4 pixels in this case, just to expand the selection. If I zoom in, you can see what I did there. The selection is no longer on the edge of their body, it's now 4 pixels away, which is exactly what I want to make sure that I'm selecting everything in this image. If you find an area like here where I'm not selecting the foreground, then you can add to the selection by going into the toolbar and selecting the lasso tool. Hold shift and click and drag around that area to add it to your selection. Then you can double click on the hand tool to fit the image to screen. Before I do anything else, I'm going to duplicate the background so that I can have it in case I need it. So I'm going to click and drag it into the new layer icon to duplicate that layer. In this duplicate copy, go into Edit, Content Aware Fill, and we're going to use Content Aware technology to fill in these pixels. Let me expand the left panel so that you can see the areas where we're sampling pixels from. And this is the auto-generated pixels. It does a really good job. I'm actually very happy with it. I'll press OK. You'll notice that it's not perfect, but we can adjust it. By the way, I press Control D on Windows, Command D on the Mac to deselect. What you need to do now is make sure that we have pixels that look realistic enough that they would be considered part of the real background. It's not perfect yet, but we're almost there. So we have these generated pixels on a new layer. So I'm going to hold Shift, click on the bottom layer, make sure both layers are enabled, and then I'll press Control E, Command E on the Mac. Applying this keyboard shortcut will merge both selected layers into one. So now I have these guys on one layer and this background. Like I said, the background is not perfect, so we're going to fix it by using the clone stamp tool. And I'm going to zoom in into this area, which is the biggest problematic area. And with the clone stamp tool, you can copy pixels from one area and paint them into another. But first, you have to set a sample source where you're going to copy pixels from. So hover over the area where you want to copy pixels from, hold Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and click to set the sample source. And then when you paint, you'll see that you're painting with the pixels from that sampled area. And it doesn't have to be perfect. We're going to blur the background and create an animation, so it should hide most small imperfections. So once again, I'll sample from this area up here and try to match it and continue painting over the image. And if it's not perfect, that's okay. Just keep working on the cloning process. So this is probably the most tedious part of this whole process. Once you have something like this, what I recommend that you do is also remove any other imperfections. And by the way, I'm just holding Alt on Windows, Option on the Mac, and just painting away all these areas here in the bottom, like so. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to select the rectangular marquee tool, select this area like so, and then just copy it. Control J, Command J on the Mac, and I'll move it over, and then press Control T, Command T to transform, right click and select Flip Horizontal. Then I'll right click on it and select Distort, and I'll click and drag up and try to match the perspective as best as possible. Something like that. And obviously this guy shouldn't be there, so I need to clone him out. This actually is becoming more of a cloning tutorial than an animation tutorial, but you need to do all this hard work before you can actually start animating. And actually, right after we do this, I think we'll be ready. We really don't have much to worry about after this particular step. So let me just complete this. And again, I'm going very quickly here, and you can see that I'm getting fairly realistic results. I know right now we're zoomed in really close and things may not look perfect, but you'll see that once I zoom out, things are going to look much, much more realistic. I'm just trying to remove these edges. And I actually want to keep the guy that's sitting up there. He looked totally fine. So what I'm going to do now is create a layer mask and paint with black using the brush tool to reveal him. Remember, with a layer mask, you can show and hide pixels, white reveals, and black conceals. And I think he's sitting here. You can see his legs. So let me bring those out like so. And I probably should use a soft brush, so I'll bring down the hardness. And I can continue painting on these areas. Awesome, there he is. Again, he's in the background, so he won't be too noticeable. I'm actually noticing one other problem area that I should fix before we continue, and that is this part here. So again, with the clone stamp tool, I'm just going to clone from this area and follow on the other area. But first I need to select the layer thumbnail and then start painting on this area, like so. Pretty cool stuff. And you know what? This area here probably needs a little work too, so I'll work on it. Awesome. Once you get to something like this, what you need to do is put that all in one single layer. Again, you can merge the layers by selecting them both while holding Shift and pressing Control-E on Windows, Command-E on the Mac. And I'm going to call this layer Clean Background. Then I'm going to go into Filter, Blur Gallery, Tilt Shift, and make sure that I drag this point down right about here and drag this one down as well, so that we start getting blurriness from this line up. Like so. That might be a little too blurry, so I can bring down the blur and adjust it accordingly. So something like that. So you see now why I wasn't so worried about having perfect selections and all that, because the blurriness is going to help conceal a lot of those mistakes. So I'll press OK. And if I enable my original layer, you can see the image still looks very realistic. It's essentially the same photo, except with a little more blur, but that's okay. And what I'm going to do now is create 3D layers out of these two layers. So we have the clean background and these guys jumping. So first, select the clean background, then disable the jumping layer and go into 3D, new mesh from layer, and select postcard. This will convert your layer into a 3D postcard. A postcard is simply a plane that you can rotate around in 3D space using the tools found here on the bottom left of your canvas. If you don't see these tools, that's because the move tool is not selected. If you select another tool, those controls will disappear. So make sure that you select the move tool, and then you can use these controls to rotate the 3D camera inside of Photoshop. So when you click and drag, you can rotate the camera. See that? We're rotating the camera, and I'm going to disable the original background so it doesn't bother us. See that? And I'm also going to close this window because we don't need it. So you can see how we can rotate around it. If you want to come back in there, you can double click on the layer thumbnail to go into the 3D panel. And from the 3D panel, you can click on default camera and the camera goes back to where we started. So that's what we want. Next, I'm going to go back into the layers panel and select the jumping layer. I'll enable it and I'll do the same thing. I'll go into 3D, new mesh from layer, postcard. And now when I rotate, you can see that that is also just a flat layer that I can rotate in 3D space. Once again, I'll double click on that layer, click on default camera. Now you'll notice that if I rotate one camera, it won't rotate the other. And that's because both layers are in different 3D layers. We need to combine them into one single 3D layer. So go into layers and select the jumping layer, hold Shift and click on the clean background to select both. And then if you press Control-E on Windows, Command-E on the Mac, you can merge both layers into one 3D scene. You can see the little cube here in the layer thumbnail. That means that this is a 3D layer. If I double click on it, it opens up the 3D panel and you can see that I have the clean background mesh and the jumping mesh. Now, with the move tool selected, I can use these three controls to control the camera. See that? This one rotates the camera, this one pans the camera, and this one zooms in and out of the camera. I can also click on an individual 3D layer, for example, the jumping mesh, and click and drag on this white cube to scale this 3D layer uniformly. I'm going to press Control-Z, Command-Z on the Mac a couple times to undo. And I'm going to make sure that I'm back in the default camera, where we basically get the original image, and that's what we want. So now we can animate these 3D layers by going into Window, Timeline. This will open up the timeline panel, and from here we can create a video timeline. If you don't see this, click on the down pointing arrow and select it, and then click on that button. And we're going to use the timeline to animate this. Click on these right pointing arrows so that you could see the layers that we're going to work with and the keyframes that we're going to work with. So first, let me quickly explain what a keyframe is. Right now in 3D space, you can see by clicking on the orbit tool with the move tool that I can rotate and you'll have them in 3D space. But notice that nothing really happened here. Everything looks the same. And if I click and drag on the playhead, nothing changes. But if I add a keyframe on the camera position and then move the playhead to another location in the timeline, then rotate the camera, Photoshop will automatically create a second keyframe. And now, if I scrub on the timeline, you'll see that Photoshop will automatically fill in the move between the original keyframe and the second keyframe. So that is how we're going to use Photoshop to animate our image. Let me just select this keyframe and delete it by right-clicking on it and selecting delete. And I'll do the same thing for this original one and drag the playhead to the beginning and the end area slider to 2 seconds. So we have a 2-second animation. From here to here is 2 seconds. Then I'm going to click on default camera and I'm going to click on clean background mesh. Then I'm going to click on this white cube to scale uniformly. So I'm going to make the background really, really big. Like so. Then I'm going to click on this blue point and drag it back until it fills the frame. If you can't see it, double click on the hand tool so you can fit the image to screen. With the move tool, continue moving that back until it fills the canvas, like so. So now if you make a camera move like this one, notice how much distance there is between the foreground and the background. Much, much better. Let me undo that. And what I'll do is scale it up even more, like so. So I'll click on camera position and I'll scroll down and make sure that I also select 3D meshes and enable the stopwatches to create keyframes for the position of the 3D meshes. What I'm going to do now is click and drag the playhead into the 2-second mark, and I can adjust the camera rotation. I can rotate the camera up a little bit, and I could also select the jumping mesh and maybe push them forward and make them larger and bring them down, like so. And we can see what that looks like. I'll hit the play button, and you can see now that they're moving in 3D space. Really cool stuff. If you want to make it more dramatic, then rotate the camera a little more in the beginning of the animation. So right about there, it's going to be a really big shift. Hit play, and they're moving and they're coming towards us, like so. Pretty cool stuff. And I can also maybe move them to the left a little bit. I think they're too far out to the right. Maybe I can push them back a bit further just to make that jump even more dramatic. So I'll hit play. And you can see them that they're jumping towards us, like so. Really cool stuff, as you can see. So this is how you can animate your photos in Photoshop. So now all you have to do is keep fine-tuning your image. Maybe I made the background mesh a little too big, so I'll click on background mesh from the 3D panel, and then with the move tool, click and drag on this cube to make it smaller. Also, drag the background up so that we can see more of the fire down here. Then hit play so that you can see how these changes affected the animation. I must have accidentally deleted the keyframe here, so I can add one more, and maybe I can move the background down just a little bit so that there is more motion than just a camera turn. And this animation looks great. All we need to do now is save the video, and that's very easy. All you need to do is click on the flyout menu and select render video. By the way, if you enjoy this video, make sure that you click on that like button now and let me know down in the comments below if you have any questions. If this is your first time at the Photoshop training channel, then don't forget to click on that subscribe and notification buttons. Thank you so much for watching, I will talk to you again in the next Photoshop tutorial.